The following is a production of Medfield TV, Community Shows.
I'm all set.
Aye, aye, sir.
Okay, and Medfield TV, we're good? Okay. Welcome to, I always need to check the date before I start here. It's the 12th? The 16th. 16th. Welcome to the, I'm sitting there, I've got dates on my mind. Welcome to the December 16th version of the Medfield Board of Selectmen. A couple points for the people in the audience. Again, this is being live streamed, so if you have comments, please make sure you pick up the microphone, identify yourself and your address. And again, the microphone is for the audio track going out on Medfield TV. It's not to broadcast your voice here in the room. As we usually do, I wanted to take a minute to just think about our troops. I'm going to change this up a little tonight. It's actually hard to find, when I first became a selectman, one of my suggestions was, or I guess it was when I became a chairman, that we would recognize individuals who are serving. And what it turned out to be is it's actually very difficult to get a good list of people serving. No one has it. And you have to be careful sometimes about how much you talk about where people are serving if you do call them out. Tonight, I wanted to recognize 4 people. 3 of them are servicemen, and 1 of them is a policeman. The 3 that I want to recognize are the 3 naval service members who were killed in Pensacola, and some of you know that hit a little close to me because I have a son who's down in Pensacola at flight school right now, so this was a little closer to home than sometimes these are. One was Ensign Joshua Watson. He was a 2019 Naval Academy grad. He just happened to be the officer on the deck, or officer of the deck that Friday morning. That's a position when you go into the training building. There's a reception desk right at the lobby, and he was the senior officer in charge, just simply securing a building on a Friday morning in a training building. He was accompanied by Airman Mohammed Sameh Haytham, who was 19 years old, and also Airman Apprentice Cameron Walters, who was 21. The stories, the news reports, you probably all heard them, but the news reports were that all 3 of them attempted to rush the gunman and to disarm the gunman before other people got killed. They were credited for saving lives. In the case of Ensign Watson, he was shot 5 times, managed to make it outside of the building, found the first responders that were out there, told them what went on, and at some point after that, he passed away. I don't have a good details on that. But this past weekend, as stinging as the Army loss in the Army-Navy game was to me, it was less stinging given that there was a Naval Academy grad who just graduated who lost his life basically defending his country. The 4th person I want to recognize is son of Medfield. His name is Charlie Griska. He's has been a Waltham police officer, has 3 little kids, a young wife, 33 years old, diagnosed last spring with a brain condition, and recently passed away. And for all 4 of those, we don't always necessarily talk about people that are lost, but in their own ways, all 4 of these people are putting their lives on the line, or have put their lives on the line day in and day out, as our first responders do here in town. And I thought we'd take a minute just to recognize the sacrifice that some make and the commitment that all make in their job.
Mr. Chair, Charlie Griska's funeral took place across from my office in Newton at Our Lady's Church, and there was a huge turnout of police officers there. There were just buses full of them that came.
This time of the year when most of us are probably happy, it just hit me hard enough that I thought we would start just remembering them. Okay, thank you. Let's see. We don't have any citizen comment. It doesn't look like. The first action item on the list is Chief Garrett requesting several actions. 1, to appoint Richard Forrester, a special, and what we'll do is if you have comments on each one of these, we'll we'll let you comment, but the first one on the list is to appoint Richard Forrester as a special police officer.
Good evening, thank you. First, happy holidays. I think this will be the last time we meet before the holiday season comes along. So, to you and your families, as
Depends where
well
the
as the
radar
rest of
traps
the
are.
residents. The first order of business is my request of Richard Forrester to be appointed a special police officer. He is currently a Boston Housing Authority police officer there. He's a sergeant. He's been there since 1995. He was a serviceman in the Air Force, as well as the Air National Guard. He's highly trained. He's an instructor over at the MPTC, which is the Massachusetts Training Council. Mr. Forrester has come in and actually donated time to assist us with different training events to the public. So I think he has a real commitment to the community that he's shown in his own time, and he'd like the opportunity to be a special here. We think he'd be a good addition.
What does that mean to be a special police officer?
So he would be, because he is academy certified, he would be able to come in and do road work, so shift work the desk if he has his E911 training, and also do details in town. So just to supplement the department, which, as you know, I could use
Great.
some extra
And
bodies.
he lives in Medfield?
No, he lives, let me see, I don't want to put out his exact address. He's a Brockton resident.
Motion.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you. The second order of business, as you know, a month or so back, the board appointed Sergeant Maxfield to his new position. Civil Service does have a form that's required a signature from, so we just request that that be signed so we could submit the paperwork.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm going to skip down on the list here just so I can keep things together, but we have a grant that we've applied for child safety seats. We have been denied this grant in the past, I think in part because the socioeconomic status of the town pretty much supports that many of the residents, if not most, can't afford to purchase their own child safety seats. However, the department recognizes that we have a growing population of affordable housing that's come up, and as we hit higher levels with that, we think that there's a real opportunity for the grant to be awarded to us this year, so we can at least have this availability or opportunity to offer people who might be less fortunate child safety seats. I'm just going to request that you sign off on our submission for the grant.
I would move that we do so.
Aye, second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. The last two items relate to civil service and our candidates that we are looking to vet at this point for the department. One of our candidates had been ill-advised through civil service that he would not meet some time restraints. Mr. William Bento had finished very well on our list. He is currently attending Fitchburg State in a program that they will actually put him through an academy and include his college credits towards the completion of the academy. Based on the timeline, we didn't think he would make the timeline eligibility status, but because our academy process is a little bit further out than we thought, he would actually be eligible. I think it's the right and fair thing to do to include him back on the list. He initially withdrew thinking he wasn't, and I think that it would be irresponsible for us to ignore the fact that there was an error made. So he would like to be considered eligible again on the list, and I'm requesting that the board include him.
I would move that we do so.
Aye, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the last item on the list is, after interviewing our candidates and performing background investigations, we feel as though one candidate would not be well-suited for Medfield Police Department. Not that she might not be well-suited someplace else, but just for our needs right now, I would respectfully request that the board bypass civil service candidate Carolyn Scheingold.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Seems like we The approval shouldn't be that straightforward. We should give you a hard time about something. You didn't give us enough to work with. You did bring a pen. You did bring a pen, so it's kind of, that's good. Thank you. Thanks. Doesn't it seem too boring when we just, yeah. Sarah, you're next.
Jane, I'm here representing the Townline Master Planning Committee.
Okay.
Good evening. So I understood you requested an update on where we are in the process. I think the last time we were just in the RFP process and going through that, so it's been a little bit of time since we spoke to you. We've been very, very busy. We interviewed, we received 4 submissions for the master plan process. We shortlisted 2. We interviewed both of those candidates, and then we ended up selecting one community circle, which was very highly qualified and received more than most of the votes of the committee. So it was pretty. It was fairly close, but they definitely got more votes. We've been working with them since I think the contract was signed early July. We got within 2 weeks we had our first meeting. We've been meeting pretty much monthly. We've had a lot of activity. I just have some notes here to keep me straight, but basically meeting monthly. We've had a number of outreach. We had a kind of interviewing folks in town. We had a community forum, which I think at least 2 of you were at, which was extremely successful. We had, I think, 100 or 200 folks. 125. Really, really engaged. We had a meal, and then we had a really great process where we asked a lot of questions, got a lot of feedback. It was fairly diverse. It was a Sunday. We kind of decided that was maybe we'll try that. There will be a number of different opportunities for input, but we thought that was extremely successful. Got a lot of feedback. We can drill more down into that if you'd like. Later, we have a handout and a summary of that we could provide just to give you some feedback on that. Right now, we're in the process of a couple things. We're further collecting information from community members, from the town departments. We have an online survey that's out right now. We got a lot of feedback from that. I think that's going through December 20th. The next phase in the process will be to get our existing conditions together. We have set up a number of committees, subcommittees from the committee which have volunteered to review those initially, those existing conditions. When we're done with the first phase of the community engagement process, we're going to come up with the goals and visions. So kind of decide that document that might guide the process moving forward. After that, we will get feedback from the community again, have another forum. We're going to develop our implementation plan, and then we're going to have a final one where we'll present everything. So right now, I think we're right now targeting the end of June for that last forum right now. So that's our target right now. We'll see how that goes, depending on how quickly it goes. Obviously, we don't want to rush it. We want to do the right thing. We'll certainly come back to you different phases to report on that. But generally, that's where we're at in the process. That's where we see it coming to completion. So I guess that's the general overview. You have specific questions on that?
I don't. I've kind of followed along with what you've been doing and everything you've been putting out, and I answered the survey that you had online and the rest of it. So I think it seems to be moving along apace.
I would just second what Jay said about the survey, that it's online at the town website, and I'd encourage everybody to participate in it. It takes less than 5 minutes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the high school students and the amount of kids that we've done with?
Actually, it was just spearheaded this is a great idea.
So we took a modified version of the town survey that we've sent out to adults, and we've sent it out to the entire high school population. We've got about 300 responses right now from 9 to 12. I'm sorry, 9 to 11. The 12th graders will do it this week. And then Sarah and I on Friday exhausted ourselves and went through every single lunch and interviewed over 300 kids
Yeah, and
about kind of granularly, like what do you like about Medfield? What do you think would bring you back to Medfield as a young adult and for your family, if you were able to think about that in the future? And what would you like to see as a kid growing up right now? And I think we got some really nice data. And one of the other great opportunities is that we were also able to, again, make a modified version of the survey and give it to the 8th graders who are required to do civics this year for social studies. And we really thought that this was a nice interface in the curriculum in terms of showing them how municipal government and your voice works. So we'll have the results of that hopefully by the end of the week. And we can see, really before they even get to high school, what it is that they're thinking about. So, and I'm very happy to share, obviously we're all happy to share any of that data with you. It was really a nice exercise. It was nice to do.
So I'm the one with the questions.
Yeah.
One of the reasons, I'm not sure, I think maybe a couple of us suggested that we have you come in at some point
Yeah.
here to update us, but one of the things that prompted me is I happened to be looking at the original charter. And I think the original charter had asked for the master plan to be provided by January or let us know in October. That wasn't going to happen. So that was what prompted us. Yeah, I don't remember hearing anything in October, but I don't think we're going to see a plan in January. So that was kind of that's what prompted me to ask Christine to add this to the agenda. Do you all have a plan to get to that master plan? Like, I know you talked about what you're going to be doing in June, but that's not closure. That doesn't get us to the plan.
Yeah, one other thing we can provide is we've asked consultant to provide as part of the RFP process and then also update it. And I have a draft of that is what are the steps and the schedule that are tied to milestones. So that I think that would help you understand kind of the next steps and where those happen and where they'll.
It would. I'm hoping the consultant is doing that as a backward plan and not just a forward plan that, well, we're going to do this for a while, then we're going to do this, because there's two reasons I'm asking. Number one, I'm sensitive to in this recent town meeting that we had, there were some people who argued, oh, we shouldn't do anything yet because the townwide master plan will be out in the spring. So there were people, which I don't think would have been true either, but I am concerned that we know when we get the master plan, because that presumably will include some decisions that we believe should guide us in the kinds of specific things that we do, so I'm concerned about that. The second thing that concerns me, if we're going out, is does this affect the funding that's required for the master plan?
Well, first, on the first point, we're working as hard as we can, as fast as we can. As I said, we've met every month, and everybody's been really engaged, and we've moved forward. And this consultant's been extremely responsive. It's a small team, but they're really efficient. They've been out there working hard, and we've been very happy with their work so far and their responsiveness. As it relates to the second piece, obviously we have to come up with a plan and an implementation plan. Part of it will be this discussion and looking at the capital planning process as well and how things are tied together. They will be tied together. I'm not up to speed completely on where everything falls, but one, it is a cart before the horse, certainly. The plan will have to be completed for the components of it to be at least out there or for review and for a decision-making process. However, there are certain things that the town probably knows they're going to do regardless, and that this process probably won't stop that. I can't be specific. You probably all know more than me. For example, if there's a school that is going to be built, no matter what, and that process is the building committee's going through that process. Certainly, this would probably reinforce that, but it wouldn't stop that from happening. If I want to use that as an example. So
I don't think do you have a ballpark on when you're expecting the plan?
yeah,
Is there
I
a
think,
target?
well, since our last meeting's towards the end of June, I think right now, I'd say probably toward the end of June.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was,
June, July.
okay, I didn't appreciate that, okay.
Yeah, no, that's
So, and I'm not even too worried about the absolute final
yeah.
plan, but the plan that's substantially there, that we actually know what decision, what recommendations the town should be thinking about.
Sure.
Okay, June.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's, our last public meeting right now, I think is scheduled internally, you know, in our schedule is the
Okay.
end of June.
Okay.
Again, that, you know, that could change, obviously, but
Okay.
we're targeting that. I mean, it's basically, we said when we started out, we think it's about a year process. We started the beginning
Okay.
of July.
Yep.
That
Okay.
lines up, and I don't think we even told the consultant that. So I think we saw that and we felt we were in sync with that.
Okay.
And again, I think we're making a lot of progress. And I think our issue is gonna be getting, you know, too much information. And that's a good problem to have, because we are getting, you know, a really good response from folks. And I think we're doing some really innovative things like what Jess and Sarah just talked about with the high school students. We're trying to get a broad range of input from not only, you know, from every cohort and demographic.
So I want to come back to that, but Jessica, do you have a comment?
I just wanted to mention that, when we started, we kind of all knew that the charter was a little bit ambitious in terms of its dates. And I think we came back
Yeah.
in
Yes.
September to kind of push that out. And we're still on that trajectory of dates. So it's not as though this is a delayed process at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
We really are moving forward in terms of what it is that we were
I
chartered to
wasn't
do.
really, it wasn't my intent to like bring you in here and go, where's our plan in January? It was
Yeah.
just, I looked at what we'd asked for and said, well, I don't think this is gonna happen in January. So
Well, and
I
I-
realized they didn't know what we were looking at for
Yeah.
sure.
Since it was you have a lot of meetings, I was only at one, and that was one of the discussion points is, can we get it? And I think we came in and I gave, I think at that time, an indication, there's no way we're gonna get it done in January. Because we felt it was like about a year process, so.
So let me throw one more thing out there, and I'm not sure if it's a question exactly as so much as an editorial comment. And it actually ties into the editorial comment I had way back when we were talking about the contract. All of this kind of information gathering is good because you get aspirations from people in town. But I don't picture that collection really getting us to a master plan that does the kind of hard strategic thinking. I'm not saying that it's not relevant. I'm just saying I don't think that by itself gets us to a master plan. It gets us to a master wish list. It seems to me that there are some questions that the town is facing around, you know, where are we looking to develop? For that matter, even, you know, confirming what the implications of the state hospital property are as it fits into a broader master plan. The issue, I think you're right, the new school is going to land where the new school lands as a result of a process, but I don't necessarily think a Parks and Rec facility is going to land where a Parks and Rec facility lands just as a result of a process that's being followed. I think there ought to be, you know, that should be informed by what the townwide master plan is calling for at a broader level. So I'm kind of looking to understand where, what I would call the disciplined strategic thinking is coming into this process.
Right.
The public inputs is one thing, but the real, what are you know, how do we identify the really difficult strategic issues, and how do we actually dig in on those issues to come in with recommendations about what the town should do?
Right. Well, I think it's a combination, right? I mean, obviously, we have to understand what the people of Medfield, you know, they're a stakeholder. On the aspirational side, for example, I got a lot of feedback that it would be great to have a community center that kids could go to. Kids feel like and parents feel like there's nothing like that for kids, and they get kind of, you know, if they don't have focus and something to keep them busy, they can, you know, get in trouble. So that might be an example where we have a community input that says this is something that we think, you know, the community could use, and then we might think about how that could happen. On the strategic side, we're also relying on the department heads and the government and the business people who you know, kind of drive the town and have a lot more empirical and, you know, real world experience in understanding the town to understand what the needs are and the challenges the town is facing from the school standpoint, from Parks and Rec, from when you talk about where the town's going to develop, obviously sewer is a huge part of that. The sewer plan will dictate where certain levels of development can happen. But we may want to, again, we're going to be looking at all the plans that have already been done as well. We're not going to rehash that. We're going to take advantage of those strategic efforts that have already been gone on and comprehensive planning that's already been done. So it's still really just, we're trying to take everything into consideration. And then ultimately, between the committee and the town, those strategic decisions and those strategic conversations will happen. And it'll tie in, land, it'll tie in financial, it'll tie in social, it'll tie in a bunch of different things to try to come up with a plan that makes sense for Medfield over the next 20 years. It's not an easy thing, but we're trying to do it.
Gus, I want to tell you that I too share your concern, and one of the things that I think that we've talked about with our consultant is that we need an actionable plan that is something that people throughout the town truly agree on and understand that this is the football they're carrying for the next 15 to 20 years, and that we need to know low-hanging fruit and things that we can do when times are not great, and things that we can do as we are looking ahead at what really we need to think about in terms of growth. But I don't think anybody wants to spend a year of their time building another binder. I mean, we're all incredibly busy, so I do think that we're very focused, that this kind of squishy period of information gathering is actually really important, because what we miss at this stage is the thing that's going to blow the plan up in the latter half. Right, it's going to blow up what we end up being able to do, because we won't have known what we don't know. And that's always been my philosophy around it.
What I'm looking for is a hard thing to find sometimes, which is, I'll say, the person or the people who have a vision for the town, and that vision won't come out of a popular vote. This is not a derogatory comment about the town departments, but the town departments all have a sense of the trajectory of the town, and then it's a more, here's where we are, here's the trajectory, so I have to be ready for that trajectory.
Yeah.
It's not, here's where we want to be goal-wise, what's the strategies to get there? So it's not really a slam on the department heads, it's just that if all of the thinking that we're calling strategic is straight line extrapolation, anticipating where we're headed, that's not even what I'm talking about. It may turn out that people, and I'm hoping there's some people on the committee that have vision. That vision could be controversial. That vision may not even be commonly shared by all of them, but having the stake in the ground that says, well, I think we should do this, that provides an orientation for a strategic discussion.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm not hammering you now, I'm just saying, but as I listen to the progress, what I'm looking for is the evidence that that kind of a strategic discussion is taking place, and we're making the hard trade-offs, or at least we're putting out some ideas of how to make those hard trade-offs.
And you might be surprised by this. We aren't getting any, major, everybody should do this. There's people that say they love business, and there's people that say there's not enough business. I mean, there's too much business. So, obviously we're going to have to pull all that together and then come up with what's the best for Medfield based on, but I think this process is just getting a sense of what do people think? Are there things, like Jess says, we're missing? We're only a group of, so many people in the town we have to take advantage of and learn from and benefit from the views and the information from as many as we can from the start of the process. And it will be some hard discussions and decisions, and there may be some very easy ones too, but it'll also have to be tied to, what we can do legally, what we can do financially, and obviously have your blessing in the end. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Jake.
Okay.
Now you know why Sarah let you get up first.
Sarah, there's some contract things on here,
Yeah. Oh, you thought you were really done? Oh, we'll 22 minutes, it's a little tight.
Well, where is it though?
Yeah, where is it?
Ah,
Oh, so we have to give you like 2 minutes to get over there, all right. All right, so back up to the action item. Sarah proposed a request the selectmen vote to accept the MHP award of $5,000 for review of the Aura project, and I think we talked about this in the last meeting, we just didn't have.
We had talked about it, I had sent it in your packet, but neglected to
It
actually
wasn't
put it on the agenda.
That's why, so.
So moved.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's approved. Next one is Sarah Raposa requests the selectmen vote to create the Complete Count Committee 2020 and appoint Sarah Raposa, Chelsea Goldstein Walsh, and Pam Gardner to the committee. Got any comments from either?
Well, I can give a little background and then Sarah can tell you more about the committee, but this came up. We had a department head meeting and luncheon last week, and we started having some informal discussions, and it became clear going around the table that there were several department heads who are interested in making sure our citizens filled out the census. Sarah had been working, I think it's at least the last year and a half, on behalf of the town for the Census 2020. And then she got together after the meeting with the other department heads and came up with this request for this committee, and I asked that they put it in front of the selectmen for this evening. But she can give you the actual.
Yeah, it's really just making sure that people know what the census is, that there is a difference between the U.S. Census, the federal census, and the annual town census, and that it's important to respond to both. We have a lot of new residents in town over the past 10 years, and actually the past couple years particularly, with some of our newer apartment buildings. And so we want to make sure that people understand that filling out the census is important for local funding. And actually Roberta Lynch at the Senior Center really wants that point underscored, because a lot of the funding that she gets is based on census numbers. And actually I wanted to add her to the list. I haven't had a chance to talk to her about it yet, but I thought that she'd be a really important person to have on the list. And also my assistant Marion Benaldi, I thought she'd be good to have on the list as well. So, yeah.
Questions or comments?
No, sounds good to me.
I had a question that I've had, I guess, for a while about the annual census, whether we can add things to that we might like to have. I think it would be useful for the town to have a telephone number for residents and an email address, so if we ever got to the point where we wanted to push information out to them, we could.
Well, they're gonna do that through the reverse 911 system they have that we're starting in January. They'll opt in and they'll provide all of that information to us. And we'll get it
good.
electronically. But that's a question regarding the census that would go to the town clerk. The town clerk actually manages the town census.
Yeah. Do you know if we're allowed to add things to it?
I don't know. I'd have to ask her.
I don't
know.
think, I think the
I don't
Secretary
think
of
it
State
is.
mandates the
Yeah.
form for that.
Yeah, that's what I was
But
afraid of.
we can run that by Carol.
So I had a couple questions. When I used to have a client who had a favorite line, I find it useful. If this is the answer, what's the question? So in other words, if this is a committee that we need, what's the problem or what's the issue that we have that calls for it?
The decennial census is something that happens so infrequently that people don't necessarily understand the difference, and why we ask every year what's going on, who's in your household, and then once every 10 years, and that they come from different sources. And there's a big push by the federal government this year to get the word out, to get people to have trust and faith in responding, because there's some worry that information may not be confidential. So it's just a local campaign to help people understand the census process.
So I suspected that, given that it has a formal name and everything, I suspected that was part of what was behind this. The only reaction I have in Medfield is, I was trying to picture the people in Medfield who either don't know what the decennial census is, or are worried about what we're asking questions for. And it just struck me as being, is that really because it's every 10 years, I don't even know if we know that it's a problem. But I was trying to say, what is the problem that we're fixing here? And where I'm really coming from is, it seems to me that the vast majority of the population in Medfield is civic oriented. They see this come through. They we're reasonably well educated. We know what it's all about. And so,
I thought you had a Facebook account, Gus. Your statement would seem to suggest that. No, I think your statements would suggest that you might not read it all that often. I mean, I think that there's a lot of civic misunderstanding among people who shouldn't have civic. Well, I would say
people would believe that to be more worrying than less anymore, if you're listening to how people feel about what the federal
Well-
government has been lately. that they just may not feel as though that's something.
Well, no. Well, but I understand the issue around illegal immigrants. I'm saying I don't think we have very many of them here.
Well, I think,
I'm talking about people here. It's I'm not
Mm-hmm.
not arguing a position here. I'm just saying, if this is the answer, what's the question?
well, I think one of the things that came up when we were having our meeting the other day in terms of the senior center is that Roberta said a lot of her seniors will just take it and say, it's not worth my effort filling it out. I don't want to do it. I already do it for Carol. Why am I doing it for this? And what I didn't realize is that a lot of Roberta's funding is actually based on the federal census, and her funding formula is based on how many seniors live here. So even if she has 3 seniors who decide it's not worth filling it out, could impact what her funding is. Okay. So I think that kind of got us turning about, other populations in town. And Chelsea had some concern about some of her clients that may not be interested in filling it out. So I kind of let them run with this, and I think it's a great idea.
Relative to that, when we do the decennial census, do we reconcile it with the annual census? Because I would think they'd be the same numbers.
They don't go to the same place, the same.
Well, I know
people.
they don't go to the same
Right.
place, but what I'm getting at is my understanding of the decennial census is if somebody who we know about that exists doesn't turn in their census, they have census workers that go out and try to track them down. So there's some way of knowing who has and who hasn't. I'm
Yeah.
just curious whether we actually
And it's just,
compare.
it is a snapshot, so I don't think it necessarily must jibe number for number with the local census, because you'll have a lot of migration during the year outside of the snapshot when the US Census is.
When do
But
we do the local census? So are we doing the local census at a different time than
January?
the decennial?
Forms go out right after the first of the year, I believe.
Yeah.
They both go out the same, when does,
The federal census will start being
April,
distributed February, March.
So-
Census Day is April 1st, so you're supposed
Yeah,
to
so-
respond where your primary dwelling is as
So
of that day.
I'm just I'm just curious to know what, to even compare those numbers. I understand that it's a snapshot,
know.
but if it's a snapshot that's only a month or two apart, I would expect those numbers would be incredibly consistent. Maybe not identical, but
Well, it'll give us a data point
If we're
for
going to all the effort, do
when
we
the-
actually look at it?
When the information comes back, it gets reported back to the president by the end of 2020, and then it'll start getting disseminated to the states in 2021. So, we'll be able to,
Well, how did they know who to send census workers out to? If they, okay, so you're saying we won't get any statistics back from the 2020 census that's as of April 1st until 2021?
We'll probably have 2 annual town census before we get the results.
Presumably they
I
should
was
be.
just asking.
I would assume the populations would be the same for that same snapshot in time.
The
like
primary
Sarah said.
purpose of the federal census is for purposes of congressional districts.
So I understand that. I'm just saying,
Clearly
what I'm
Council on
looking
Aging
for
friendly.
is how reliable are our if we have a census, if we take 2 different censuses within 2 months of each other, however, maybe it'll take us a year to be able to do this comparison. I'm saying I would expect the numbers would be very close, but I'm only asking the question.
let's pull the 2010 numbers.
Yeah, I'd have to look. We can talk to Carol and see. I
I
don't
mean, I'd just be
remember
curious.
2010 when we did it,
If-
so
I
I'd
wasn't
have to
here.
look.
If our census numbers are plus or minus 20%, that's kind of alarming.
No, I've looked at this in the past. I mean, I've looked at, not specifically to compare them, but I've looked at the year-to-year numbers and then the decennial numbers, and, I mean, they're close.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's what
they're
I would
close for the
expect.
year when you pick it, and then in the interim,
Yeah.
it fluctuates in between, as you'd
That-
expect. And the fluctuations in this town have been very minor since 1980. Like, we've been roughly between 12,000 and 13,000 since 1980.
Compared to like an urban
where you are.
environment
Yeah, I
where
mean,
there's
it's
all
pretty-
kinds of room for,
It's pretty steady, and so, but I've not done that
Find that
exact.
reassuring, Mike.
Well, I mean, it's just that's what the facts are, so, yeah.
Next, go ahead.
it affects your 40B calculation. It's
Mm-hmm.
also going to affect hypothetically the available alcohol licenses, so there's.
Next question. The census is a town clerk responsibility?
The local census, but not the federal census. It gets
Who's responsible?
distributed by either the post office or from census workers. So
No,
they're-
I think what Chairman Murby's asking is, does the town clerk normally handle federal census work?
Oh, as the primary point of contact? I think so. And other, I've only been involved in 2010 census since I've been a planner, and I was not involved in 2010.
So then my question is, this is a committee that doesn't have the town clerk on it, and I find that curious.
Well, our town clerk is retiring, so she is not, we did not include her in this. She was actually present when we had all these discussions, but we have not included her. I would assume that whoever we name as the interim town clerk, we would strongly recommend
Okay.
become part of the
Okay.
committee.
Okay. That's
My
good.
recollection is the federal census forms get mailed directly from some federal agency.
Hmm.
And then the workers are organized independently. They're federal workers on a temporary basis, and they follow up based on the initial round of documents. I don't believe the town clerk has a direct role to play.
Online for the first
They
time
would
this year,
like
too.
you to. They started sending us material about a year and a half ago to get the towns to publicize this. Most other town clerks are doing it. Sarah was kind enough to take this project on, and then we found out there are other interested department heads as well.
Yeah, the Secretary's office has been doing some pre-census work with addresses and new properties over the past year or so.
Okay, and then the final question I have, and this is for Mike and Pete. When I looked at this, I'm fine with all this. I just wanted to understand how it connected to things like the town clerk and why we were doing it. My view is this is a committee that does not require a board of selectmen to initiate or establish that. I think this is something that, if it makes sense for the town to do it, we ought to just let the town administrator launch the committee, put the people on the committee that you'd like to have. I'm not quite sure why it needs to even be up at our level to approve it.
Look how much free press we got on this, though.
I'd be happy to talk or have you come and report on the status as often as you'd like. It's just, where I'm coming from is the 135 committees that we have, and I'm sitting here saying, do we really need to have all those committees is there anything from a policy standpoint, anything from a financial standpoint, anything, I guess, from a political standpoint that says, oh, but what we have in mind here, you guys really better take a look at this or approve it, or otherwise, to me, it's a town committee established within the town administration.
It's the work they're doing, right? I mean, it's,
Okay.
right?
Sometimes it's
I
hard
mean,
to
I
tell.
appreciate, I appreciate the consideration. It's so.
I didn't
but
want
don't
to take
think we
any
need-
authority away from the Board of
So,
Selectmen, so
how-
I recommended Sarah
That's
come
right.
directly to you.
Because we do grab all the authority we can get a hold of as often as we can.
Because if we create this as an appointed committee, you're gonna have to post notices and take minutes and do all that other kind of stuff. And it sounds like what you're really doing is work
Yeah.
and not just yapping. So if you're just
And
doing work.
the
and
last
yapping,
people
do
you
the
want
work.
in the way when you're trying to get real work done
Yeah.
is the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
You heard it here first.
Probably not here first, but you heard it here. So.
I'd be
if
more than
Pete-
happy
We'll
to.
be on
Mike,
our
if
way
you're
then.
I don't think we need to appoint this committee. It's not, I think the committee, we should extend our best wishes and our thanks and our encouragement to do it all, but I don't know that we need to formally act.
I don't have any need to have this committee.
Yeah, no, I don't see any reason why we have to.
I like the idea of it.
You can see why we should create it as a formal
No,
committee.
I think Gus actually just hit the nail on the head. There's a huge reason why you really don't want it as a town committee.
All right, good.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Oh, we're not done with
That's it.
Sarah yet, though. Or yes, we
We
are.
are, that's
No,
it.
that's it.
Yes, we are.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
She's got, you got 8 minutes to get to the highway.
12 by my watch.
Okay.
That clock's fast.
That clock's fast. They're trying to get me to
Although
close these
what really-
meetings faster than I
What
usually
really matters is the clock in the public safety building, but.
Okay, let's see, I guess Chief Carrico's not here. Chief Carrico requests the selectmen to vote to authorize the town administrator Trierweiler to sign the contract for Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency grant.
Yes. Chief Carrico just received notice earlier, actually, I guess it was late last week, that he received a $3,500 emergency management operations grant. As you know, since I took over in January, we've been working with department heads to apply for any and all grants that we feel will be helpful to the town. This will allow us to set up training for our new emergency management department. It requires a match, but the match is included in his salary as emergency management director, so that's been met.
Great.
So moved then.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Yeah, I went through the contract itself, and there were all these provisions, and it's like, this sounds like, you know, if we had Hurricane Katrina here, then this would all apply.
It's a
but-
lot of paperwork for $3,500.
Yeah, yeah. So I didn't read it all in great depth. Okay, that's approved. Christine Treeweiler requests the selectmen authorize the chairman to sign the annual Tree City application.
We are working on that now. We will not have it ready until closer to the due date of December 31st, so I'd like to have you authorized to sign it, and I will send it to you to sign off before the end of the year.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. But somebody else on the board might have wanted to be the one that gets to sign that one. Okay, next item on the list is the 2021, FY 2021 budget, which is annual and capital budget discussion.
So I asked to put this on there. We had the original discussion about this last time. When we get into January, we're gonna be moving pretty quickly, so I wanted to make sure there was something on here if we wanted to have a further discussion. I asked Christine and Nick in the interim, after our last meeting, to add one additional scenario to the scenarios under consideration. And that would be to mimic, with respect to the capital stabilization fund and the fire trucks, the current projection for what we're gonna do with the building stabilization fund and the roofs, which is that we would still look to borrow for the fire trucks, but to pay the debt service out of the stabilization fund, instead of having a separate debt exclusion for the fire trucks. And so they're gonna put that together and lay out what that would look like. And that would probably require a slightly larger amount in the stabilization fund to cover that, although it's, it's only $1 million over 20 years, so the principal is 50,000, the interest is gonna be whatever that would be, 30,000 start or so. So it's like 80,000 a year for 20 years, but it might, if this is what we're trying to do and we go in this direction, I think it makes sense to do it that way. And that even where we have to borrow, we're gonna have that fixed amount as for capital. And it's not to say that I necessarily think we should do it that way, but just as another scenario to look at as we play that out. Because that's what we have, if you look ahead in the projection for the capital with respect to the roof project, which is sort of the biggest thing we have coming down the road that's not a new building. Right now, the goal is to pay the debt service on the roof project out of the building stabilization fund. So you're not doing a separate debt exclusion on that. So that's just the one piece of work I had. I asked Christine and Nick to work on to add to that discussion. And then just if people had any reactions, further discussions, comments, anything we should address, just because once we get into January, we won't have a ton of time to talk too much further about this, because whatever we decide, we're going to have a fair amount of sort of public forums and public, similar to what we did with ALS and otherwise, to kind of explain what we're doing and kind of walk through the big chart and all this other stuff and kind of explain where. I will say, Christine, your reference to $138 million kind of was picked up immediately. And obviously, it's an accurate number based on the plan, but obviously a huge chunk of that is the new building. And a lot of the, not all of the projects that are on the capital plan require new revenue. That's not already baked into the tax rate. So a big chunk of that is going to be paid out of the municipal building stabilization fund and other sources. So it's not necessarily that it's going to be $138 million of new asks. And obviously, a chunk of the school building would be paid for by the state as well. So that's why I asked this to be included, and and that's all I have to say.
Comments, reactions?
Good to have another scenario to look at, absolutely.
And I'll send those. We just got them late tonight, and there was a question with the DOR, just getting approval on that. Another town recently had an issue with paying that out of their capital stabilization fund, so we're just waiting for a response from DOR. But
Okay.
I'll email you the spreadsheets tonight for the scenario.
Okay, great.
They had an issue.
Well, one of the towns we had read recently had an issue paying the debt service out of their capital stabilization fund, and we were just asking for more information as to what the issue was surrounding that. We just don't have a response yet.
Because actually, as you were just describing it, I was sitting there reacting very positively to the fact that if you have the flexibility on a capital stabilization fund to use that money to pay debt service, what you've just done is you've enabled yourself to smooth out the flow from year to year even more than if you kind of build it up, and then you actually can really do a lot to keep it flat.
And you can really plan forward for your projects,
Yeah.
which is, I think
Right.
one of the goals of saying the $138 million was to draw attention to how we're going to fund all of this, and we can make it all work.
My only two so first off, if that in fact is something we can do, that sounds to me like a good thing, because it actually allows us to manage the year-to-year. The two things reactions I have are actually things I think I said in our last meeting. One is that wherever we set this limit at, it should not, in my view, it should not be set at the number that we think we need in FY '21, just because that's the number we need in FY '21. It ought to be a number that when we go forward saying, here's the amount we want to fund it each year based on our programming of these costs. If you will approve this, this is what's going to fund our capital equipment. So you don't wind up getting supplementals along the way. This is what's going to cover it year in and year out. And if we overshoot, then we can always let it drop down. But the goal here would be to give people a true annual number. That's what we think it would take to do that. And then what was the second thing? Oh, the second thing is that when we do this, I made the point last time, this is not just a one-year windfall of whatever the amount is, and then we keep all the money that's already in there. Your response, Mike, I think it's the right response, but it'll be a trickier one from a public education standpoint. Because if we take the money out of the operating budget that we are now, I'm not suggesting the full amount is gonna come out of the operating budget, because last year's operating budget didn't have any capital equipment in it that was on the revenue, tax levy. But if we take something out of the operating budget as a result of creating this thing, you made the point, well, actually, but what we're gonna do is replenish the stabilization fund, it's gonna cover OPEB. I think that's the right answer, but the public education process here is people need to understand how we're using those to build up reserves. Because what we're saying is, well, you're gonna approve this, and you're not actually gonna see an equivalent drop in your operating budget. You're actually gonna see us do this stuff over here. And then, there'll be the operating budget itself probably gets smaller, but it's not like they see a first-year tax impact as we're talking about this right now.
Right, no, it's correcting the basic fact is that we have underfunded our capital, right? So there has not been reflected on the tax levy the true cost of paying for and replacing the capital materials that we need to support the operating programs that we have. And so it is a request for new revenue to address the capital, and by segregating it, by sequestering it, you're limiting its ability to sort of be siphoned off into other operating budgets, which is what has happened, right? Over time, as we talked about before we get to the end, like, well, okay, we'll get the car next year, and then you chip away at that a little bit, and then once you've moved that into the operating budget, then it's somebody's job, or it's somebody's program, or it's somebody's something that's now in the operating budget that now has a constituency to defend it. And then it looks like you're cutting the operating budget if you want to go back to the capital. And so we've gotten ourselves into this problem over time. And so there's not it's not as though we're just moving $1 million that's currently in the operating budget to spend. We're not spending $1 million. Last year we spent nothing.
Right.
And we have also, we have not put enough into our reserves, anywhere close to enough into our reserves. And so whatever is freed up from, in the operating budget by moving the capital into a separate funding source, under our existing financial policy, first has to go to fill those reserves, because we have to, reverse the decline that's happening every year and get ourselves back onto a better, kind of more permanent and stable track in our stabilization fund and free cash and the rest.
So I'll make the observation, and this is the rainy, I guess this is the rainy day message that Mike used to always talk about, is if in the past, the last decision we made was the capital decision. So we allowed everything else to put whatever upward pressure on budgets it did. And then we would go into the process hoping that there would be something, and sometimes we found something. And in the case of last year, we didn't find anything in order to avoid an override. What we're doing is we're resequencing, and it's always easy to put off capital spending. You can always justify waiting another year, so that's why it's easy to do that. But this whole process is restructuring it to where those decisions are being made up front. So people won't like this analogy maybe, but it's like trying to step on the mouse under the rug. The mouse used to run, the last corner the mouse would run to escape was the capital budget. We've now moved that, and it's no longer the option. The last corner is gonna be the operating budgets. And I anticipate that we're going to have some hard discussions about what we do and don't do in operating budgets, because we'll no longer have the option of chasing the mouse over to the capital budget corner of the rug. But it doesn't mean that the pressures don't go away. It means that we're gonna have to recognize what we've just done to ourselves.
Right, and look, at the pressures last year were there as well, and I think the warrant committee, held us to the policy that we adopted. And we saw the good effect of that when
Right.
we got this call from Moody's, and the fact that we had adopted the policy and that we had complied with it in the first year led them to say, okay, they're on the right track. And so this is kind of putting in, I think, the last piece of that policy into place where we can show our compliance with the reserves, our compliance with free cash, compliance with capital, and then be in a better position to deal with our operating budgets going forward.
It may also be possible, some of the pressures in the operating budgets go away because some of the capital spending that wasn't really in the capital budget was covered under the operating budget. So if we have a more comprehensive, more proactive capital equipment budget programmed out, then some of those kinds of pressures go away from the operating. We have a cleaner operating budget that really deals with operations.
It introduces a higher level of fairness as well for some departments who may have had money at the end of the year to buy those capital items and others didn't, so.
Right.
Just quickly remind me what your target is in terms of cash reserves? I remember this percentage last year, but I don't.
So the goal is to have it be no less than 7.5% total of the budget, and that's a minimum. I think last year we came in, the estimate, it's written in the
Yeah.
policy, it's on the website, but last year, and the one, we have to amend the policy slightly this year, just to make clear the measurement date of it. And so what we did last year, which I think is correct, is what we're gonna try to do in the budget process is project in the budget season what the free cash and reserves number will be the following January, when the free cash closes out. So when we did the budget last year and tried to estimate where we were gonna be in reserves, we looked at how much free cash we thought would be thrown out of the budget last year, what the stabilization fund was going to be, and all the rest of it. And we were pretty close. We were pretty close in saying, and I think the number we hit in last year's budget was 8.7% of that. Now, the reality is, we are losing a good chunk of that reserves because we did what Moody's did in 2015 in terms of estimating what our reserves were, and that we counted the school building assistance fund as part of the reserve. So if you read the Moody's report on our town when we issued the bonds in the public safety building, the analyst at Moody's calculated us as having $23 million in reserves, and calculated our reserves at about 40% of our operating budget, which is an outstanding reserves number. But if you drill into it, you drill into it, the majority of that reserves, and I have a little thing that I put together a couple years ago on this, projecting forward as well. You look into those reserves, the majority of those reserves was in the school building assistance account, right? When they flipped the system, we got the $18 million in 2008, and so they looked in 2015 and they said, oh, wow, they have all these reserves, great. But they treated it as though they were unrestricted reserves, when in fact there was a set schedule with the Department of Revenue to spend down that amount to pay off the bonds on the 3 school projects from '01 to '03. And so we are kind of fighting against that decline. And so we have to increase the amount we're contributing to reserves, because the amount that's been in the budget to contribute to stabilization, which is our main unrestricted reserve account, is about $200,000 a year. That $200,000 has not been raised in a very long time. And so if you're trying to get to, between 7.5% and 12.5% of your budget in reserves, we have to make up approximately, I think it's about $600,000 to $1 million a year that we lose in the MSBA fund every year. And then we get to 2023, that'll be zero. And so one of the objectives of the policy was to reverse that trend and replace that amount to get back to the level. And if you do what we've projected to do, we'll do that. So when we get to 2023, our numbers will still look pretty good. They won't look like they did in 2015, but they didn't really look like that in 2015 either. And that was what Moody's did, it's not what we did. We gave them the accurate information, and Moody's read it the way they did it. But I think we have a new analyst now at Moody's, who, when they looked at the numbers, didn't have the same interpretation of the reserves as the analyst who did the bonds in 2015. And so, so we're on the right track, but we have to stick to the discipline. And as I like to say, there is no ribbon cutting for getting your stabilization fund up to like 8% of your budget. We might have a little munchkin party here if we do that, but.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Yeah, just, Chris, when you're talking to DOR, just emphasize, if you would, that if you haven't already, that it's a specialized stabilization fund that we're talking about, because they might have it confused, because I could see where they would object if you would just take it out of it.
Right, that's why we're looking for feedback from this, what this other town did versus
Right.
what we're planning on doing. We just want more background before we finalize our scenario.
As I think about it, there's you'd still have to go through the debt override.
They wouldn't want to see you drawing out a general stabilization to pay off of. That would be a
Pay debts out
problem.
of reserves.
Yeah.
Well, you know, or at the very least, you'd have to, you might pay,
If you've got the specialized stabilization fund has the flexibility, and it's for specific purposes, and if it's within those purposes, which I understand would include something like that, it shouldn't be a problem. And it may just be that that other town didn't do
That's-
that.
yeah,
They
that's
would
why we just want
draw it off a
clarification.
general reserve account.
this is probably just a dumb observation, but I just connected the dots. But as a practical matter, out of a stabilization fund like this, the voters have to approve the actual expenditure
Correct.
for that coming fiscal year. But on top of that, they would also have to approve the debt override for the obligation.
No.
Just the
if we-
one-time up
Does that make
front.
sense? Well, that's what I'm saying, the one-time up.
There's a
upfront.
one-time
Right, when you create the
Correct.
stable, but you wouldn't have to do it every time you issue
Right.
debt.
Right,
Yeah.
right. You would have to do it every time.
No, you
No.
would be treated just like when we borrow within the tax levy, because it's gonna be paid out of an existing source of tax revenue. You're not asking to exclude that amount from the tax levy. And so, for example, when we borrowed to do the football field, we borrowed that within the tax levy. It's paid out of the regular tax levy, and that just required a 2/3 vote of town meeting. And so if we were able to pay the debt service on the fire trucks or on the roofs out of the stabilization funds, then you would not have to vote for the specific authorization, because you'd be paying for it out of the tax revenue being generated by the specified capital stabilization fund that was created by vote.
In the case of the football field, I'm trying to remember now, but if it was $1 million to redo the turf on the football field, we approved the entire $1 million,
1.7.
1.7. My point is, we didn't take out debt.
Yes, we did.
approved.
We bonded for it.
Did we approve 1.7 million that year or not?
Yeah, we approved the issuance of bonds to generate $1.7 million. We borrowed $1.7 million, and then we pay the debt service on those bonds out of the regular tax levy. So there was not a separate debt exclusion vote. We only have a debt exclusion vote if we want.
You're gonna have to go back and learn more than.
Yeah, I mean, you only have a debt exclusion vote if you're looking to raise new taxes to pay the debt service on it. And so if the taxes that are gonna pay the debt service are coming out of the stabilization fund, or they're coming out of the general tax levy, you're not asking to exclude those taxes from your tax levy calculation. They're already in there. And you need a 2/3 vote of town meeting, which is the same vote you need to approve the budget anyway. So,
All right, I'll have to, we don't need to waste time now. I have to get that straight in my head.
yeah.
Okay. Anything else on the capital budget or the budget? Okay. Next, pending, vote to accept gift of parcel of land from Michael and Teresa Taylor, 609R Main Street.
So they've signed the deed of the parcel to the town now. So we need you folks to vote to accept it per the town meeting vote. And if you could get it done tonight, I'd like to get it in the mail to the registry tomorrow. And I'd also like you to vote to authorize the chair to sign any necessary IRS tax acknowledgement document.
So there were, as I recall, I guess I didn't print it out. There were at least two places that had to be signed on this gift, I think, right?
There's two forms.
There's two forms, there's an IRS form and the actual,
Did they both
Acknowledgement that there were no services or whatever.
Did they
given.
both require, did one require 3 signatures and one just required mine?
Yes.
Well, actually, what requires 3 signatures is the acceptance. The deed acceptance itself requires.
yeah,
3
the IRS form is just the chairman's authorization.
It's in the yellow folder.
It's in the yellow folder, because that says pending, not action. Okay, there it is, okay. So I just wanted to make sure, it's stuck in my mind that there was one place that required all 3 of us, which
Yeah,
is
that's the
the town
acceptance,
acceptance.
right.
Okay, and then there's the acknowledgement, which just requires me, and that's the IRS thing you're
And
talking about.
there's an actual IRS form there too. I think
And
that's
there's an
just-
IRS.
One's just a letter that says there were no, it looks like a letter that says there was nothing,
This,
nothing
the
of-
question here is, should Georgia sign it?
no.
No, it's actually you.
It's me. So there's 3 things.
Mhm.
The first one, all 3 of us sign, that's the acceptance.
Yeah.
The second one is I only sign, which is the acknowledgement of the gift. And the third one is IRS Form 8283.
Basically saying that there were no goods or services provided for the gift.
Okay.
So it is a
So
bona
can
fide
we,
gift.
do we vote separately on the acceptance of the gift? And
Yeah.
then I would
Then
imagine we
just
should
vote to
bundle the other
authorize the
2
chair to sign the
on
tax
acknowledgements.
documents.
Okay.
I would move to accept the gift of the parcel of land from the Taylors.
Here's a second.
I'm just looking at the map, just because I think it's fine. It's sort of across the street from me, but I don't think
It's,
there's
it's it's actually backs up to the plaza,
Cemetery.
the village plaza there.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I
then
thought it
we're
was up
good.
against the
I don't
cemetery.
think it would
It's
be,
not that close
I
to
don't
you.
think it'd be a financial interest
They
either, but,
You know what? They cut it off in the back of that new house that is across the
I
street.
see. Ah,
It's a back
It's
parcel.
the place the master planning committee's thinking about putting the vape shop.
fantastic. Good, it's good news. I just want to make sure I don't have to recuse myself, but I don't think I have to, so, all right.
Prepared for second?
Yes, I second, yep.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Okay, so that first one passes. Second one is just a motion allowing me to sign the acknowledgement and the IRS form.
And any other forms required. So moved.
Second,
All those in favor?
aye.
Yep.
Aye, okay, good. Done with that. Discussion of MSH solicitation of interest in committee.
So I asked to have this one added as well, just because we had talked about at the last meeting, possibly soliciting or considering additional people to be on the development committee who might have some additional skills or specialized expertise that could be helpful to the town in preparing the RFQs and RFPs. And I just wanted to put that back on the agenda, just so we can have a plan for doing that and publicizing the fact, or whatever we're going to do to publicize the fact. So, and obviously, we're not going to accomplish anything over the next few weeks, but if people would be interested in doing this, I know we had one interested person already.
Yes.
But I don't know what the best way is to publicize it. I don't know, Pete, if you want to post it on
I'll
your
put something on my
and
blog,
say,
sure.
you know, we're looking for people who have construction expertise, real estate expertise, kind of, to be added to be considered to be added to the development committee. And I think I'd like to, just because we do want to move ahead here, I wanted to put that on there. And I recalled as well, Gus, that the development committee was going to meet
They
in
did
between.
not, yeah, they did not yet, so I don't have that. I did have, I would have put this in the Selectmen's report, but that's all right. Pete, you can cover this in the Selectmen's report. Teresa James kind of had a gathering of people that had been working on the state hospital zoning. And while I was there, we talked with her about, because she might be a logical person, however, she was happy to help, but was concerned about actually taking a position on the committee, just given her other obligations. So I think she'll be a resource from the planning board that we can tap, but probably doesn't want to be on the committee itself. I haven't really had a discussion. I think, my sense is that within the committee, certainly a membership of 7, which is what we had talked about, is a target that made sense. In anecdotal conversations, there was a little bit of concern about 9, only because of the size of it. I think we cross that bridge when we get there,
Yeah.
depending on who responds.
And do you know if any of the current members of the development committee are going to look to get off?
The only one, I think the only one that, it depends, Johnny Martinez is the one who has the potential conflict of interest. So we had talked in the last meeting that if somebody thinks they're gonna have a conflict of interest, maybe they should cut the ties now. Part of me says, given that there's only 2 people from the committee that are left, if Johnny, there's only 3 on there right now. Johnny's one of them, Ken, Richard, and Todd Jurovenko.
I thought there were 5 total.
Well, Adam Emiden dropped out.
Oh,
and
okay,
then
so
I
we're
was
already down to
fifth, so
4.
we're down to 4.
Oh, so we still need at least 3 if we're gonna go up to 7.
Right,
Okay.
so my point is, there's a piece of me for pragmatic reasons, as long as we're staying on the right side of the, conflict of interest laws and everything, Mark, that for pragmatic reasons, we have 3 people that have been on the committee. At this point in time, none of them have a conflict of
Right.
interest, but potentially
Well,
someone could.
I mean, he should seek his own opinion from the Ethics Commission, but
Yep.
one issue is that if you're working on a project, in some circumstances, you're foreclosed from ever showing up on wearing some other hat than you were wearing on behalf of the town on that project. You're just barred from doing it almost indefinitely. So you certainly can't wait till the last minute and then flip sides of the street and come
Yeah,
back. So-
yeah, the issue I wondered about is, given it's an RFP process, where the RFQ process is simply trying to get to a down-selected list of developers, whether he would be precluded from being able to contribute.
Well, say you're hypothetically involved with developing a whole project, and then just short of it being finalized, you get off, and then you come back in using
Yeah, yeah,
the information you have as to the project that was put together. That's
that's not,
not a good situation.
yeah,
to
the
be in.
RFQ process, though, is more of a, it's looking for
Yeah,
qualifications.
but it's all part of a bigger process, and that's how they're gonna look at it.
So maybe that he has to step down,
Yeah.
even though he doesn't actually have a conflict of interest, it's just by the nature of his job that he could, because of the people that he has as prospective clients. But so that would leave us with 2 plus me, which I don't count as a resource in the fully qualified sense of the word. So that would then give us room for
Yeah.
4. And I think, Pete, you have 1, I have 1 person in mind I'd like to talk to, and then I think we might pick 1 from the master planning committee. And I think there's a couple of choices there for institutions, so we probably could use a 3rd.
Yeah.
And to your
qualified
points
person.
you started to make before, I believe the planning board is a special permit granting authority on the rezone. So you really don't want anyone from the planning board to be involved. 'Cause that'll-
Well, involved, like, can Teresa help? I don't mean on the committee, but,
Well,
or,
again, that's raising issues in terms of impartiality of the planning board sitting as a permit granting authority, so.
once again,
All right.
government goes through blinded. All right. So maybe, she wasn't gonna be a member for sure. It's the only question is whether the committee can tap her expertise, and that she worked also on the.
Well, it's a matter of
master
degree.
plan.
It's just a matter of degree, but,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, her purpose wouldn't be to advise on the, I'm just probing here, I'm
Right.
not pushing. Her purpose wouldn't be to advise on the activity of the planning board. It would be her role as a member of the master planning committee. But because she's on the planning board, she would have a perspective, so, all right. We'll cross the bridge when we get there. Anything else on that topic?
Nope.
Let's see, town clerk process, sounds like.
Just to give you an update on the process, I've reached out to the Town Clerks Association to ask them to supply me the list of retired town clerks who'd be interested in serving on an interim basis for us, on a part-time and interim basis. And then I am seeking interested town hall employees who currently serve when the town clerk is absent, doing birth certificates, that kind of thing, to see if they'd be interested in being named as assistant town clerks for that time as well.
And do you think we can get a timetable? Because, I mean, I assume Carol is planning to take care of issuing nominating papers will have to be available for this year's election in January. presumably.
Yes.
I think actually the date was the 12th of December was when they first became.
Did she already issue them? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, well then, that's on.
Yeah, that part I think is okay. I had a conversation with her today. She's been sending me information on early voting because there's going to need to be decisions made in January for that as well. So the sooner we can get somebody, the better.
Okay.
So
I mean, in the absence of that, will she make those decisions, or?
I believe in consultation with myself, yes. Yes.
We're still targeting trying to have an answer early January.
I would like to have an interim here
Yeah.
by the second or third week of
Because
January.
the primary is March 3rd, isn't it? Isn't the presidential primary is March
Yes,
3rd?
and
So the
there's
early
going to
voting
be
will
early
start
voting in
February.
February, yes.
And I'm
It's 2
worried.
weeks, right?
It's 2 weeks unless you want to go longer, yeah.
Right.
I guess if we get a retired town clerk, the overlap issue isn't as big a driver,
Correct.
so that's why that would work okay.
Yep.
If we did, when you said second or third week of January, I said third week of January, she's gone, I think, by the end of January effectively, so that's 2 weeks.
Right.
Okay.
What's her last day?
Officially, legal, technically, it's the end of March, right?
Well,
It's,
beginning of March, but I think
yes, but I think she's going to be leaving the beginning of February.
she'll be on vacation starting in February.
Okay.
And then the town election is just right after that. We don't do early voting for the town election.
No, no.
Thank you, Christine. I think next is minutes. Unless you switched up the minutes, these are the ones that are left over from.
There's 2 from the last meeting and 1 I sent out today, which was very long and
Yes.
probably took you all afternoon to
I
read.
did, I've got a lot of changes in that one from October
I didn't see it
25th.
till 4 o'clock. I gotta find where I put all this stuff. So the first one is the June 18th meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had given you comments in that way back when. So I definitely looked at them. I definitely looked at them.
Okay, let me look and see if I have
I either
comments.
gave you comments or I didn't have any.
Okay,
And I sent you my,
I have your electronic comments, yes.
so Pete.
So on the June 18 one, I had a couple suggested edits.
Perfect.
And Chris, I'll have
If you can just email it to me,
I'll
that's
just give
perfect.
you this sheet when I'm
That'd be
done.
great.
But it was just to clarify the discussion around the youth outreach, because a lot of things that I think got into the minutes that you expressed that night, Gus, were not totally accurate in terms of how it had actually transpired, because I made inquiries about that after the fact when I heard what you had said about the people on their advisory board not having been appointed by the selectmen, and what they had done was they had submitted the people to the former town administrator, and he had never brought it forward to the selectmen. So that, it's a nuanced issue in terms of how it came about, but it wasn't because of the Medfield Youth Outreach not putting it forward. They had put it forward, and it just never reached the selectmen.
Well,
So-
but as a matter of record, the selectmen never approved the new members.
That's true, but that was because the town administrator didn't bring it to us.
So I'm looking at your, Chair Murphy said new members need to be appointed, endorsed by the BOS, and he feels that that has not been happening. It's like, I don't feel it hasn't been happening, it didn't happen. It's a matter of record.
But it's a matter of record because the town administrator didn't bring the people forward to the
It
selectmen.
didn't say that, but it's a matter of record, it didn't happen.
It is. But the statement, the way that you made it, seems to point a finger at Medfield Youth Outreach when the finger should be
Yeah, no,
pointed
so
somewhere else.
I'm fine with that, but when you say if something feels like it hasn't happened, that means somehow or another I have a subjective, I just feel like it hasn't happened. And that's not my point. In fact, I think we actually checked the records.
It didn't happen,
didn't
but, so someone reading this would think that it would be the Medfield Youth Outreach's fault, and it was not. And so that's the point. So I think that the record should indicate that.
Well, I mean, the record is the record of what was said at the meeting. I mean, there are things that are said at meetings that are not necessarily correct. I get the point you're making, Pete. I would say I didn't react to this as pointing the finger at them. It's sort of written in you know,
The way I said it
somewhat
in
in
the
the,
meeting,
somewhat in the,
pointed the finger a little bit,
in
so
the
I stand
passive,
corrected, but-
in the passive tense. I guess it's the
So I
previous
guess-
sentence, the one you corrected,
I think
right?
of it as two ways. One is that we're creating a record, a historical record for people in the future. And so that if somebody were reading this, they would think that maybe the Medfield Youth Outreach hadn't done something properly. And so that, and you're right, absolutely right, that was the way that Gus said it. And Mike, what I'm trying to indicate in the record that we're creating is that what was said isn't quite accurate. But I don't know how you-
The problem is it is accurate.
It's accurate as to what was said, but it's not accurate as to how it transpired.
Well, I mean, he doesn't really say they chose not to come back. They hadn't come back, right? I mean,
They had put things forward to the selectmen that just never got to the selectmen because they weren't transmitted.
okay, I mean, it seems like your objection, Pete, is with the sentence before the one you're editing, though.
Well, maybe I,
The sentence says, Chair Murray doesn't feel the advisory board has come back before the BOS since they were created.
well, and that again, that's his
Christine,
feeling.
I'm looking- Did I
So-
send you my changes from, I'm looking for my,
18th?
like I sent you the email, I had email changes and I had a,
Would it be
I have-
better, Pete, if it would said, Chair Murray said all boards are reappointed annually, yet Chair Murray noted that the advisory board's appointment has not come back before the board since it was created.
Yeah, that's fine,
Right?
sure,
I mean,
yeah,
Sure.
that's, I mean, that's the, I'm not,
sure.
I know what you're trying to do, and I don't object to the fact that you want to make it clear that it wasn't because they didn't try, but I think you want to have the record accurate as well, so I
And
think
then-
that change is fine.
And then on the next page, it was just a question of, it describes, has endorsed the new position, and it wasn't a new position, it's just filling the existing position of the director that had left. And so that's in a couple places.
This is an upgraded position, right?
Same position, the salary has been changed.
So there's no change in the requirements, it's only the salary went up?
Master's degree required. You're correct. Master's degree was the change.
So if you don't,
Yeah.
maybe rather than new, it should say upgraded position. Because if we had just been replacing the director as the director, I wouldn't have asked the question. It was more saying, had the Board of Health
So what
approved
are we,
this change?
how about saying that filling the vacant upgraded position?
That's fine. That'd be okay.
Okay,
Yeah, that's okay.
then we're all happy.
filling the vacant upgraded,
That's fine. That's fine.
and you're okay with that edit to the?
Yeah.
Not been
Yeah,
presented for
absolutely.
reappointment,
That's
but
good.
yeah.
Yep, that's good.
That covers you too, Pete? They've not been presented for reappointment? That works?
And there's for Chris.
Okay.
Although it doesn't include your one, Mike.
Well, I got it right here.
Okay, I'll take both those.
I would move to accept the June 18 minutes as amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And on the next one is the August 13th minutes, and after I sat there and admitted I was delinquent on those, I get back home and realized it wasn't present for that meeting, so I should have let Pete just take the full fall for not being ready for that one. But- So I wasn't at that meeting, so I probably don't need to comment on what happened there.
It actually didn't describe everything that Mike and I accomplished that night,
I'm,
because there was
and
a,
as impressed as I was with how much you got accomplished in my absence,
Because that's the
I
one we
really
went-
appreciate.
we went through the action
Pointed
item
it
list
out.
that night, right?
The action
Right,
plan, we
right.
really
Yeah, we
went through
really
the
hit that
action.
action item list.
and Marion didn't really get all of those, but that's okay.
As long as they were
I think
actually,
Chris has
I
them.
think you should fully
Well,
note
what
it
we'll do is
after
we'll
I bring
attach
you
the
through our
upgraded
accuracy here.
as
I
long
think
as
plan
they,
to that.
full list.
as long as it's been actually deleted from the action item list, that's fine.
And there
Much
were
smaller
two.
file.
Was this the one where she didn't know what the MIAA was? I guess that might have been on the
I
other
think that's
one.
in the June one.
But there's one word that she just had off there. She had will when it should have been with, I think. It's interesting, she writes the minutes very differently.
Yeah, I think I've seen this one. This was approved minutes.
Can I back us up? I found my notes from June 18th. I knew I had them, and I should have looked at the most logical thing. So let me just point out a couple edits. Most of these were purely editorial, but on that one paragraph, Chair Murphy would like to know if the BOH has endorsed that it's now the vacant upgraded position. But then the last part of that sentence didn't make, and if the advisory board has an authority. And I said
I closed it.
not sure what this point may have been, but it doesn't sound right to me as it was worded. So that same paragraph that you just changed, the last part of that sentence, I just didn't know what it meant. It
have it
didn't make
back.
sense to me.
I recall that as what authority did they have, what legal authority they have?
There was also a discussion at some point about whether they should continue as a town board, but I don't think
Yeah.
that was that night.
I think it was that night, and basically, my sense was that they didn't feel like they needed, the only reason they were a town board is because at some point the selectmen had made them a town board. I think they were just as happy not to be a selectmen-appointed board. So I kind of felt that when we get around to reappointing that, we'll just not have them be a reappointed board. To double check.
Where is
Kathy
the
Townsend was
comment
on it.
about the authority of
It's
the?
the third page, I think it's the third page, that one that we just worked on around this one
Oh.
here. See, it's the first sentence. What is it?
And if the advisory board has an authority.
Or is it has any, maybe it's any authority.
Has
That might
any
have been-
authority.
I bet you it was any authority.
Yeah, I think it's right. That
So
makes
you find
sense.
You find that, Christine?
In this one right here.
That's what it was, any authority.
Any. That
Any
makes sense.
authority. Trying to
That
find.
doesn't make sense. And I think, yeah, I think that was it. I made editorial, like, correct word smithing cut things, but nothing substantive. And you can
Okay.
use your judgment on whether anything that I
Yep,
made.
just trying to see where I linked it.
You can look at-
No, I'm fine, thanks. Did you want a revised motion on June 18 then, or are you good with?
I think, if that's so minor, I don't think
Yeah,
that that was.
okay.
that
I
was
would move that
adding-
we accept the
that was
minutes
adding-
of August 13 then.
I second.
I'll abstain. All those in favor?
Yep.
Okay. And then, the meeting minutes
October
from
25th.
October 25th.
It was a very heated,
I was shocked, I
You
can
were-
tell you, I was shocked to discover that I wasn't at this
You
meeting.
weren't at the meeting, no, you
You
weren't
got
at the
there
meeting.
at 7:01 instead of 7 o'clock, and you missed
We
it.
got so much done in this meeting, the entire minutes don't fill in a full paragraph.
I couldn't believe it when I
Slice
saw
of
that I had
this
missed a
personified.
meeting. I thought, what was that? How did that happen?
All right.
We have a motion to accept.
I would move that we accept the minutes of October 25th, 2019 as submitted.
I second. All those in favor?
Aye. There we go.
At
So
which
note that
Medfield TV
Selectmen-
got
represents a
got
significant
license.
portion of my day-to-day.
Selectman Peterson abstained from one of the most important Board of Selectmen's meetings that we've had in the year. He wasn't there. Approving a wine and beer permit for the COA. All right, license and permits, consent agenda. Jamie Picard, Coordinator of Trustees of Reservations Events. The Rocky Woods requests one-day wine and malt beverage permits for the following. Wait, should I read them all?
No.
No,
Okay, so.
we consent.
So there's a series of them running from January through February to March, on through April. Most of them, the latest any of them go is 9:30 at night. The earliest any of them start is, well, it's a little
11
unclear about
a.m.
that Brew Moon night, but I'm pretty sure that's 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. The earliest I see is 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., the Rocky Woods Easter Brunch and Egg Hunt.
So moved to.
Second.
Well, I want to make one comment.
Oh.
The, where is it? It's the Beaver. It was,
School vacation,
School
beaver
vacation,
discovery
beaver
hunt.
discovery hike,
So-
February
so-
19th.
so.
Which population are we
Here's
going
what-
after
well,
there?
well, so no, this is a comment. I was hoping somebody from the trustees would be here. So it's a school, so my only point, and obviously, I'm not gonna follow my sword on this, it's a school vacation beaver discovery hike. And we need a beer and wine license for that.
Yes,
Yeah, if
as
you're
long as
getting
it
dragged
fits-
along, you need some incentive other
Huh?
than
How long's it
beavers.
been since you've had kids in school vacation?
All the more reason why I'm careful about this. We've had some stories about adults at kids' events that have been excessively focused on beer and wine to the exclusion of setting a good example for their kids. So when I read school vacation, I said, are we talking about college vacation week or are we talking about high school vacation?
I think this is catering to parents who have spent the full day with their children who are on school vacation and ready to go look for
you would
beavers and drink Brew Moon on
You would recommend
February
we approve
19th.
this, I take it, too, as a
So at
mental
least,
health.
I would at least indicate it's printed in the agenda, because all the detailed stuff should be
Oh, it's all in the agenda.
on the vote.
Yeah. I think we
We just
moved,
vote
we
the
usually
consent
move the
agenda.
consent agenda as
Yeah.
printed in the agenda.
Okay, I've made my point in principle.
It's nice to see the trustees are so active.
6 to 8 p.m. Wednesday, February 19th. Bring your flashlights and your beer cozies and
With
go
the
track
under-
down some
With
beavers.
the understanding that the Brew Moon hike is in fact a 6 PM to 8 PM hike.
Yes,
We'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
I second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Aye, okay, passed. We better not get bad reports on school vacation week. Town administrator update.
I just have a few things. Just want to let you know, Nick is not here tonight. He and his wife welcomed their first child last Monday, Ryan Peter, 7 pounds, 1 ounce. 7 days today, and he will be back on Wednesday. I was just actually talking to him about 5:30 tonight because we were shocked, and we did check twice to make sure it was Medfield, not Medford. We got our handicap accessibility grant for $40,000,
Oh.
which we were told would be an incredible long shot, and we got the call at 5:30 tonight that we
Excellent.
got the full amount.
Great.
Which is
Congratulations.
fantastic. So we'll get started on our ADA transition plan right away.
Is that,
Great.
what's that particularly focused on, parts of the town?
So part of when Jerry McCarty did the master plan for us, one of the things he said is, I'm not qualified to do the full ADA piece of that, and that's missing from the plan. So when we started looking at it for the capital, Nick, I think it was his first week, said there's this grant program. It's a long shot. The state told us it's a long shot, but we may as well put it in. If we're telling all the other department heads to file for grants, we should be doing it in the town administrator's office. He put it in, and we got it. So it will fill that gap in the,
So it's a
in
pla-
the.
it's a planning grant.
It's a planning grant, and we're hoping, depending on procurement for it, that there will be money left over to also look at sidewalks and curb cuts as well. So we did identify that as a piece of it, which is, I'm assuming, why we got the full 40,000. So I did let the ADA committee know tonight that we will get started on this right after the new year.
Great. That's great.
Very exciting. I did want to point out that Chief Carrico, in addition to getting his emergency management grant, also received another grant this week for $2,800 for some firefighter equipment. So we're proactively going after these grants, and department heads are doing a great job.
Is that related to ALS or is it just standard firefighter?
Just standard firefighter equipment. He was looking for new hoods. I think it's 2844 he got to replace a number of those. We have a meeting this Friday with DCAM out on site at the Medfield State Hospital to start looking, bring up the topic again of the roadway. So we'll be meeting with them at 8:30 on site, and then we'll come back here where it's a little warmer to finish that up. I want to thank the Cultural Council for the holiday stroll. It was really nice to see the town hall building lit up and part of that project that night. It was really, it's just one of my favorite events in town. Just a couple other housekeeping things. The town hall is going to close at 12:30 on Christmas Eve on the 24th, and we'll close at 3:30 on New Year's Eve. And that's it. And Mo has updated all of the transfer station hours, and they'll be open on the 26th as well, and he's posted that for everybody. It's our biggest cardboard collection day of the year.
Great. Selectmen report.
So I would echo what Christine said about the holiday stroll. It was great. I mean, I think it does keep getting better
Yeah.
every year. I thought the additional Jersey barriers along Baxter Park were helpful because they moved think this is the first year they did it, they moved the singing to the back of Baxter Park. It usually was up sort of towards Newton Hill.
Yes.
Newton Hill Grill. They moved it to the back, kind of, usually it's very dark back there. It's kind of nice. They put the stage and the lights in the back section, so the people were deeper into Baxter Park than they usually are, so it was good to have the Jersey barriers. I thought the restaurants were incredibly full.
It was,
That night.
the weather
more
was
s-
perfect.
Yeah, weather was perfect, more so than I remember. My wife and I tried to go to Nosh and Grog for dinner, and it was kind of full. We had a half an hour wait at 9:30 at night in Medfield. There's a half an hour wait in the restaurant. This is incredible. So we ended up at Takara, which was also quite full. So it was great. I think it was great from an overall downtown business standpoint. On my
I thought that the Park and Rec did an excellent job of getting the ice off the sidewalks.
yes, yep.
Yeah, so that was actually DPW that was doing that, and actually I had a note here to thank them. Bobby Kennedy, since Mo was on vacation, Bobby met with all of us involved in the holiday stroll on Thursday and came up with a plan to remove a significant amount of snow from Baxter Park so that we could do all of that and have people walk through there safely, so.
I actually saw a DPW guy walking around with a shovel full of salt, and he was just sprinkling it on the sidewalks. They did an excellent job.
They did a great job, and they actually, the roadways were getting icy that evening, and they got called out in the middle of the holiday stroll. So I just appreciate all the pre-planning they did to make sure that event went well. And
And
there
it was
was,
slick around 4 o'clock.
yeah, and it was
least in
nice to
Newton
have
it
them remove the snow from Baxter Park so that we could actually walk through the park safely. So thank you to them again.
And then just an update on the Dale Street Building Committee. We had a meeting, I think, last Wednesday, which thanks to our remote participation policy, I participated in from the lounge at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. But the connection was terrific, and I think I heard most of what was said. I think the main takeaway from the meeting is there's going to be a lot going on over the next couple of months in terms of different discussions in public forums and the rest of it. And so it's going to be a very busy first part of 2020 on that issue. We're meeting again tomorrow morning, potentially to try to finalize the contract with the architect, which will then come to the Board of Selectmen for approval. I did get a note shortly before the meeting tonight that there was something missing from the draft, so it's possible we won't deal with it tomorrow. But we're trying to get that reviewed and recommended to the board for approval. Nothing to update on the Affordable Housing Trust side or on the collective bargaining agreement side. No updates on timing with the police. I think we're still hoping to have it done for this year's town meeting and potentially
The plan.
town election as well. And I think Christine had noted that the fire union has asked for to begin negotiations as well. Their contract is up in June, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, the last one we did was, I think they were about a year without a contract the last time. And so when we did the last one, we did it was a 3-year contract, it was retroactive to 2017. And as you may recall from the last fire contract has all the incentives in there for the current firefighters to become paramedics. And so I don't know what the fate of that will be in the next contract, but we'll be starting those negotiations
Shortly.
shortly.
Have
Probably
those-
not on the 24th, but
Not on the
shortly,
24th.
yeah.
Mike, have those incentives resulted in anybody becoming paramedics that we know of?
Not to my knowledge, no.
No.
With respect to the Dale Street School, there was a community workshop that I was able to attend half of. It was a gathering information from the public at the Dale Street School cafeteria on Monday of last week, I think it was. Marched in the holiday parade. Memo did a nice job of entertaining a whole bunch of Girl Scouts and other people. Although the Girl Scouts seemed to peter out once we turned onto Park Street, and they all seemed to disappear.
Drift into the crowd.
The Energy Committee is trying to connect with the Development Committee about the state hospital and see if they can impact the RFP in some ways. There's people at Eversource that will actually help the town put things that are related to energy efficiency into the RFP that would benefit the town and probably the developer. The Medfield Foundation had a meeting. They also had the Angel Run, which was hugely successful again. Tons of people, families had a lot of fun. And the Medfield Foundation is going to be starting the process for the volunteer awards. If the nominations for those are in January this year, and so that if you have anybody that you want to recognize for their special volunteer service to the town of Medfield, please do that before the end of January. And that's pretty much it.
Couple of items. One, just to build on the Energy Committee, one of the things that came out of, what was it, last week, that there's an annual report that needed to be submitted. I think we talked about it in the last meeting. I just make a general, I'm actually glad that I wound up having to sign that annual report, because I wound up having to read the annual report, and you go through, it's all on the website, but the thing I had underappreciated is how much work the Energy Committee has done over the years to identify different projects, and it's in some ways it's a little bit like what we're doing with the capital plan, where you have this picture of everything that's there. Estimates of what the actual savings have been, or what they're projected to be for plans that are not, that aren't completed yet. And anyway, the point was, for those of us who have solar panels on our roof, I kind of knew that they did that. For those of us who go out at night and see the street lights, I kind of know we do that. And if you do the budgets, you know LED lights have been there. But if you look at the annual report, you suddenly realize that there's a far more comprehensive effort that's gone into identifying projects, some of which are done. In fact, I might say that the ones that involve less town expenditures to complete are done. And so some of the other projects that are out there are actually ones that'll cost money. But if you look at the projected payback, it's on a pure investment standpoint, assuming we have the money to invest, there are a number of projects that are out there that are still, they would hold up pretty well on any kind of an ROI calculation.
Mike Sullivan used to, I think, use the figure of 40% as the energy savings that the Energy Committee has implemented in the town, and that's, I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
Yep.
So it's a lot of
It
personnel
is. So that was,
payments that are being made through this energy savings.
yeah. So that was one. Pete, you left out the jig that we did after, when the band first stopped in the middle of town. We were trying to keep the people at the back entertained, and it was kind of fun. We didn't keep it up, though, after that. We just did it the one time, and
No,
I'd go with that.
yeah. We did dance with some Girl Scout
Yeah, we
leaders,
were
too.
reaching out to the community, and it was like a square dance behind the band. We weren't attracting large crowds, but the band was pretty good. Let's see, the Development Committee, as I mentioned, has not met yet, so I don't have anything new to report on that. Pete and I think we were both at Teresa James just had a social gathering last week. It was just kind of bringing people back together that have been working on the state hospital, and it was fun. It was nice to see everybody, but I actually, for my part at least, when I saw how many people were in the room and realized that the different roles that they had played, people from the planning board, people from the original master planning committee, the development committee, the consultants we had, and Steve Nolan came back for it. You look at the number of people that were in the house there, and you realize how much effort has gone into the various stages of this. And a town like ours does well because the people that are in the town step forward and volunteer to do things. It's not, in a lot of ways, I don't think it's the elected people. Certainly it's the employees, but it's not the elected people sometimes that are making the big difference. It's actually volunteers that are making the big difference. And just looking at the number of people in the room was an impressive, it just physically made an impression on me just because they were all there, and it was fun. Like Pete, I also went to that school meeting last week, but unlike Pete, I got invited to join I think it's the visioning committee, so I just happened to be in the part of the room where Dr. Marsden was at the end there, and so he invited me to join it. I did confirm this has got nothing to do with the building committee, so this is a separate thing that's kind of, I think, a community, Jessica probably can describe this better than I can, but there are 3 meetings scheduled from 4 to 8. They're all on Tuesdays, so if I do this, there's a couple of, probably 2 of them that I have to leave an hour early for our meetings, because the first one, I think, is the first Tuesday of the month.
This is my circus, but it is not my monkeys, so I am not on this particular.
I am no one's monkey. Anyway, so I got invited to kind of join in on that, and he assured me it was it's only a 3-meeting circus.
Right.
Is that,
exactly.
yes,
Yes.
so it was
Therefore it extends.
limited obligation, but they were like 4-hour meetings, and I may have 1 hour problem at the end of 2 of them, depending on when we meet in January. I think I already mentioned this, but I owe you all an OPEB update. And I do have the end of fiscal year, which is June 30th numbers, so we're up over $3 million in the balance. I've only taken a quick look at it, but I think we had something like about a 10% return last year. So the OPEB Trust Fund Committee continues to look brilliant because we're lucky several years in a row. But anyway, that balance is going up. And then the last thing I had was just a question. Did anybody go to the cyclocross event?
I did, yeah.
How was that?
It was a huge number of people having a lot of fun.
I could hear them, and we just ran out of time. And what was happening is I was still hearing a loudspeaker over there at like 4 in the afternoon.
I was
they-
coming back from Shaw's around then, and they were just driving out of town at that point. I was there for half an hour maybe.
So it was.
I talked to them this morning as a follow-up, and they were very happy with how everything went, and they were very happy and very thankful we moved it to Sunday versus Saturday.
Yeah, it was a good day to do it,
Yeah.
I'm sure, but,
Yeah.
well, it worked out well last year. It sounds like it worked out
Mhm.
well this year, and I think it's a good event for getting visibility over the state
They
hospital.
did have one issue, which they wanted to alert me to first thing this morning, is that they did have a barrel that they were using as a fire pit. They should have sought a permit for that from the fire department. They did not. They did actually request the fire department come up to make sure it was put out, and that's when they found out they didn't have a permit for it, but they just slipped through the cracks. They apologized. They really hope it doesn't have an impact on next year's race if they are able to do it, and I assured them that, it was a mistake, it was taken care of, we'll be fine.
That's all I had.
There were plates from New York, Connecticut, Virginia, Maine, New Hampshire. They come from a long drive to get there. It's an interesting crowd.
Very.
That's all I had, other than, I have one question on informational items, if it's appropriate for Mark to comment on it. It may not be. Is there anything else, any other business?
No, I was gonna note actually, because I did note that it looked like that the Appalachian Mountain Club issue may be
It is resolved.
resolved.
It is resolved.
So,
Yes.
that was all I was gonna note on that, so.
Yep.
The Appalachian Mountain Club came through in responsible fashion, as I was expecting they would as a longstanding member.
Yes, and their next step will now be to come before the Board of Selectmen to finalize their license agreement, and which I anticipate they'll be doing in the spring.
Okay, great. Anything else, Pete?
Nope.
Mark, the only of the information items, the only one that caught my attention that I read through was the case on Noon Hill Road, but I don't know. I read it, thought there were some solid arguments there. I don't know if there's anything appropriate to comment on that.
If you wanted to get it substantively, it would probably be best to do it in executive session. That was simply their attempt at a cross motion and response. There were certain legal parameters that they were supposed to stay within.
Can we talk about so is the process, are we in the final stages of a resolution?
We've done the filing, there's no resolution, and what's happened is they met the deadline for, the court back in the spring laid out a deadline for us to file a motion. Let me just take quickly back, I don't wanna get into this too deeply, but the legal standard on these type of things is certiorari action, which is basically the court reviewing the record for errors. So it's a limited judicial review. And that's notwithstanding all the paperwork here, that's what it comes down to. So I was charged by the court with doing the motion for summary judgment as it's called, and which I did with the record and all. They then had a certain amount of time to cross motion and to support it with appropriate legal document, a legal document, memorandum, which is what that was.
Okay.
So now both parties have submitted with the court. At some point, the court will either decide it on the basis of the submittals or may schedule oral argument. I don't know what will happen, but that's where it is.
Okay. All right. I don't have anything else. Does anyone else have anything else? Yes.
Since I do help out Carol in the office as part of the registrars, I know we're looking for volunteers, and I know she's gonna publicize that some more, but any press is good press for that, and
Okay.
that's coming up.
So are you publicly volunteering, or are you asking us to publicly announce we're looking for volunteers?
I've already penciled in for a couple
Okay.
slots there,
Okay.
but
Okay.
there are morning and afternoon.
Okay,
so,
but there's more room, you're not gonna hog the entire days for early voting, you can make room for people if they would like to contribute to the democratic process.
Right.
You've heard it here, Medfield. Time.
And what's the nature of the commitment, Nate?
I think it's somewhere around 8:30 to 1, and then there's another, maybe from like 1 to 4 or 5,
Okay.
so.
And if it has nothing to do with the town elections, are town elected officials allowed to volunteer within that? Because this is early voting for
the presidential
primary,
primaries.
Right, this is.
but not for elected positions within town. So is that,
Yeah, we can
If
definitely
anybody-
confirm
so-
that, and I know she's gonna put out try to get some stuff with the patch put out there, so we can.
take on more volunteer work?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good night, everyone.
The proceeding was a production of Medfield TV, Community Shows.